of the distinctions around how we communicate now is what's worth live versus what's worth recorded. Sometimes you can just deliver a message that's recorded, but if we're going to have a live one like this, why? Well, one, you get to ask questions. We'll have time for that at the end, and you can ask it during the chat as well. Secondly, I'm going to be responding to that, but also to keep you engaged is that if you leave a chat remark to every question I ask, I will send you a copy of the book, The Culture Blueprint, at my own expense, send that to you. And the best comment or question, I will send it to your whole team, a set of books to your whole team. So stay with me here. One of the things I realized about virtual presentations is when I'll go on stage at a big event, there's time to go into stories and things like that. With this virtual, I know that you might be thinking about going onto Facebook or LinkedIn or somewhere else right now, or all these other distractions. And this is a very different medium. And I want to immediately teach you how to lead from this medium, because what this is a meta class. What does that mean? It means that I'm teaching you on one level of the content, but the other is how I'm actually delivering is a way that you can keep people engaged, whether it be your clients, your customers, or your own team, anybody that you're presenting to. And a few quick tips on this. One is, remember, because this is a very different mode of communication, there's all kinds of ways to look elsewhere and zone out and trance out. So one of the things is, notice how my eyes are at the top third of the screen. Why? Because that is a powerful position. Now, how would it be if I'm down here like this? Does it feel like I'm a leader if I'm presenting to you from here? Not really, right? And if you're presenting this way, you're actually having this impact on your people that you are small. Whereas if you position the camera to have your eye in the top third, then it's a power position. That's one. The second is audio. So notice how you hear me now. And I'm going to switch off of this mic onto the computer mic. Now I'm on the computer mic, and notice that difference. Why is this important? Because when we don't have high fidelity with the video, with the audio, of feeling at a peer connection, people zone out because it starts becoming this telephone chatter. Whereas when I switch it back to the mic, you can notice this deeper resonance, and it's like I'm there with you. So these are two quick, easy hacks to immediately do to be more persuasive and influential in your meetings. And the last one, I call this the Sesame Street effect. Why? Because Sesame Street, I'm sure you're all familiar with, did some interesting market testing. Because before they created the show, they tested out a show where it was just people, kids and people talking, etc. And then what they did was test out a show that was only this. Puppets. Yep, puppets. And then what happened was afterwards they tested this, which is puppets next to humans. And then engagement went through the roof. So just the puppets and just the kids wasn't that engaging, but the two together, engagement was tremendously there. Why would I share this with you in a business meeting? Why? Because what we've seen with Zoom meetings is that if it's just me and my room background, that's one level of engagement. And if I switch to slide modes, which can have all kinds of problems technically as well, then I'm up in the tiny corner of the screen, then that's a certain level of engagement. But when you combine them like I'm doing here, simply by exporting PowerPoint to graphics and uploading them to your Zoom backgrounds, then it's tremendous engagement because you don't have to look in several places at once and you don't zone out. Okay? And another one of this, as you saw me do before, these are those top 3 tips. Zoom, eyes at the top third, use a great microphone, and use this Sesame Street concept. And this applies to this as well. This is so low tech using it, but it's engaging. I found that as I lead meetings this way, people lean in. They want to look closely. They get more engaged. It's so low tech. Anybody can do this, or you can have somebody draw if you want really nice ones. And these literally can become your slide deck. So again, I want to start right out of the gate with giving you some fast tips that you can use to be more influential, more of a leader in these virtual times. And what we're going to do for about the next 25 to 30 minutes is I am going to be teaching you about how to be an even more persuasive leader. First, what we're going to do is get into what I would call myth busting, because this is a time to really get real. Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. Switch back. Thank you for the comment there. I to the wrong mic. As you can see, this is the
You did. Now it's much better. You made your point.
So much. See, thank you. Thank you all for the chat. Thank you for staying engaged. You will definitely get a book. Yeah, it went to my webcam mic. So what we're going to do now is get into busting some of the myths that are happening right now. One is these are things that I found that they're changing now that we get into virtual leadership. One is you can't get away with bad leadership anymore. You can't get away with it because people are so distant. We need to be strong because we can't be walking around the office checking on people and being right there in their face. The second is we can't get away with bad meetings. You can't, because people tune out immediately. Even if they're staring at the camera at you, they might be thinking all about lunch because it's disengaging. The third is that the 8-hour workday never worked. It never worked. You get that dip in productivity in the afternoons. People are socializing. They're on Facebook. They're doing all these things. 8 hours of work was never a thing, especially now. It's only in the industrial age that it was really working. And that was because they made it go from 12 hours a day to 8 hours a day. Then there's this. Anything more than 3 priorities is no priority. I've been to some of these meetings at the offsites where they go, these are the 10 priorities we have for this year. Are you kidding? No, we need to really, really focus and have everybody be on the same team. Any more than 3 priorities, you've lost the team. You've lost the departments. And the last one is you can't control people. That's a myth as well. We think that just because we're walking around seeing people doing things, that doesn't mean we can control them. So I'm going to be talking to you about how to adapt to this new environment. Because what if we don't? What if we don't? Well, 3 things can happen. We can lose great people. We can lose our jobs if we're not good at this, or we can lose our freaking minds. That's what happens if we don't change the way we lead. And so my promise to you in this, for your paying attention, which is a cost, you're paying your time and attention, is that you're going to get more done in less time without the stress. More done in less time without the stress. And here's how we're going to do it. It's this basic way of going from the abstract to the very, very tangible. I started you off with some very, very tangible tips that you can use, and we're going to get there in the end. But what I want to do is start with the principles, because the principles can inform all kinds of behavior. The frameworks are a way to operate. Once you see these frameworks, you'll see it all over culture. And then what I call the culture hacks. These are things that you can do quickly to create a huge change. If you didn't hear in the beginning, my name is Robert Richmond. I was culture strategist at Zappos, co-created Zappos Insights, and I've had the pleasure of consulting and speaking for some of the best companies in the world. And here's what I've realized with this. This is the big thing. One is that every company's problems are totally different, but the solution is the same. Everything from college entrepreneurs all the way to Procter & Gamble worldwide, the solutions are the same. Also, what I've realized is experiences make the difference, not the content. That's why I've invested a lot of time in creating an experience here for you, and an experience you can take home and use for others, and something that you can keep in mind, that it's not your words, it's the experience that you create for your people, for your customers, that's going to shift them. And I'm going to be sharing with you more of that here. And also going to a deeper dive into culture. Why? Because culture is becoming more important. The analogy I like to use to this is flying a plane. My friend Peter's a pilot, and he flies one of the Cessna's prop planes. And I said, can you fly a jet? And he said, no, not because he doesn't know how the plane really works. The plane dynamics are very the same, but a jet goes so much faster. You have to be incredibly on point and ready with everything. And so that's what's happening now that we're going virtual. Cultural elements are way more important because we can't walk around, because we can't just develop culture just being right next to each other. So these cultural concepts I'm going to teach you, some are specifically for virtual, but others are to ground you in a fundamental education of culture so that you can create the environment that you want online or anywhere. And to answer people's questions, the way that I'm doing this is by using the virtual backgrounds. You simply export your slides into images and import them into the virtual background, and it works more seamlessly than even slides, and you get to be in the screen with it as well. So it always amazes me when people say, because you might have this as well, say, okay, well, when are we going to talk business? The culture is this soft stuff, isn't it? Well, here's the thing. Write in the chat, who do you think, what organization, write in the chat right now, that has the strongest culture? What organization would you say has the strongest culture? And can somebody say some of the answers that we see coming?
Sure, we've got Google, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Apple, tech heavy, Amazon.
Yeah, great cultures. None of them come close, I believe, to the strength of the culture of the military and specifically special ops like Navy SEALs.
We had a U.S. Army in there, so we're good. Yeah,
okay, U.S. Army, right. Yeah. So, but especially for why? Because they have a code, they have a creed. And if you don't live that creed, people literally die. So when they talk about values, it's not some kind of guideline on the wall. It's we hire by them, we fire by them, we train for them, we make sure everybody's living them every single day. Because if not, I die or my partner dies. So the Navy SEALs pay more attention to culture than any other organization I know. And so that's why I say to business people, if you think the Navy SEALs aren't about results, and are not hardcore, I don't know what is. And they pay more attention to culture than any other organization. And just like they have their code, at Zappos, we have ours of the Zappos family core values. These are the ones that you get hired by these values. You get an hour of training on each of them in training from people inside the company, not trainers. You literally swear an oath to uphold them 24/7 and sign a contract saying you acknowledge if you violate one of them that you'll be fired. This is the strength of a strong culture, which goes into principle number one. Principle number one is reinforced principles drive behavior. Reinforced principles drive behavior. You might want to be motivating. You might want to be influential, all these things. Here's the thing. Our own human behavior shows that we are way more likely to act to protect something we want to keep than to get a little bit something better like a bonus or a raise. So if you've got a great organization and you've got great people and you want them there, if they know that those principles are stated, whatever the principles are for your company, whatever those values are, and they violate them and they're gone, they will work very hard to uphold them. Versus if they're simply guidelines and you're trying to motivate behaviors. That doesn't do it. Reinforced principles drive behavior. Number two is engagement over happiness. Engagement over that. What does that mean? Apple culture, like you were talking about in the chat, when they were creating the Macintosh, they were working 90-hour weeks, yelling at each other, stressed out. They weren't happy, but they were massively engaged. Engagement is the key. When we create a great game, when we have people who are really sharpening up their skills, who are working hard, who are working for something bigger, that's what people want. Happiness is something that I'll talk about in a second, but it's really up to each individual more. Third is aligned teams beat stars. Again, back to the SEALs analogy. If they have a team carrying the log during training, if they're not aligned, it falls down. It doesn't matter how many strong people they have. So a weak team that is actually fully aligned is stronger than a team of all-star players who are not aligned. Another example of this is if you've ever watched the NBA All-Star game, it's way more boring than you seeing an amazing team playing together, even though those people are all all-stars. Number four, momentum over velocity. Momentum over velocity. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to be going through quickly here all these things, and you might be overwhelmed or try to do them all at once. That's not the point to go quickly. Momentum means we build on success, step by step, brick by brick. And if you see things like Google's OKRs, talked about in the book Measure What Matters, Google, who's got an amazing culture, like you said, it took them 2 years to implement that. 2 years of pulling out hair and being like, okay, we got to tweak it and do this. So don't expect immediate results. What's important is the momentum, not the velocity. And last, optimize for learning. Optimize for learning. What does that mean? Well, after having studied productivity for a long time, and especially things like Sprint and Scrum and Agile practices, is that they're actually not built for results and productivity. They're built for learning, meaning after something like this, which is a sprint from a Scrum, is a period of learning to go over what worked, what didn't, post-mortem, all these things to learn for the next week. And the byproduct of that is productivity and results. So oddly enough, we take our eye off of the productivity and results. The same way a basketball player would never play the game just watching the screen the whole time. No, we don't focus on the score and the results. We focus on how we're playing the game, and we focus on learning, and that's what gets us the results. Is this making sense? Great. I'm just going to pause. Do we see any questions or comments worth mentioning?
Yeah,
Robbie,
Sue, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sue Peterson, do you want to ask your own?
Sure, Jane, thanks. I just, the engagement over the happiness. My question was really, how long can people stay engaged without being happy?
Yeah, I'm going to actually get to the framework for happiness, so I'll be talking about that as well. The point is that I've seen people at very strong companies that you know the name of who are having everything they could wish for, and then they just go, and I'm like, you're leaving that company? I've heard it doesn't get better than there, and they're like, I want more of a challenge. So if we're really keeping people for the long term, it's about their growth. It's about their challenge. It's about creating something bigger than themselves. If we only want to keep them for 3 years until even though they were happy there, they say, I want something different. I've seen it not be as powerful as engagement. That's a great question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Any others? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and switch up. We've covered the principles so far, and we are going to move into frameworks. But first, here's a quick hack if you're dealing with kids at home. This is a technique that you can use to get work focused while you're at home. Just want to mention that I'm all about the hacks. So here's the working with kids at home hack. All right, let's go into frameworks now. One is the framework of a game. What does that mean? Well, it means a few things. This all comes out of the work of Jane McGonigal from a book called Reality is Broken. She studied gamers worldwide. Anybody here have kids who play video games? Yeah. Do you ever have to motivate the kid to play the video game? No. Why? Because they're incredibly engaging. And Jane McGonigal found that there are 4 factors to a game. And this is different from gamification. This is games meaning, 1, they have a clear goal. And there's one goal, like there is in basketball or a soccer game. What happens when you have a lot of goals? Everybody's all over the place. What happens when different departments and silos have different goals all over the place? Whereas when Max says, Apple, we got to beat IBM, everybody focused on that. The more focus of a game, of winning that game with the goal, the better. And I'm going to talk about how this applies in a second. But now just get the concept. Rules. You understand that if you pick up the ball in soccer, it's not that you're a jerk, it's just that you're not playing soccer. Can we all agree that we're not going to pick up the ball? Are we all agreed on the rules of playing the game? Number 3 is the feedback and keeping score. Anybody can point to the scoreboard and see how they're doing. Yet one of the number 1 complaints about employees is that they don't know how they're doing. They don't know how well they're doing. And this was told to me with my star player said she didn't know if she was going to be fired or get a raise. I thought, I am not giving enough feedback of a score of how she's actually doing in the culture. And the last is opt-in. Opt-in meaning it's optional for people. So how does this apply? 2 examples of this. One is the Zappos training that we did. The goal is to get in, like getting into SEALs training. And you don't just get in. The goal is to get in. But the rules are you have to show up at 7 a.m. every day for 4 weeks. And you have to get a 90% or above on the test. And you get feedback constantly through coaching, and it's opt-in because people are literally paid to quit so that that's not a reason that they feel forced to be there. Goal, rules, feedback, and opt-in. And this is probably, if you've been on Facebook right now, if you're kind of tuning me out one way, this is the time to tune back in because this is the real game changer. Because the center of culture is meetings. And what that means is when you show up to a meeting, do we know the goal? Is it a decision to make? How will we know when this meeting's over? Be clear on that goal, get it out in advance, and ideally send stuff in advance. That's why I sent you all those stuff, that video and survey, to get you thinking about this before you even show up to this room. So 1 is a clear goal. 2nd is rules. Is it okay to interrupt? And now with Zoom, what if somebody wants to talk? Well, a good idea is you just put your hand up visually. Or a technique that I've used with some meetings too is to signal that you're in agreement. You do this jazz hands so that the speaker can see, oh, this is really resonating. What are the rules about interrupting? And what about showing up on time? We'll be talking about that in a moment too. And feedback and keeping score. This is what I use for that. It's called a Kanban board. Some of you may know about it. It's a fancy term for stickies and to do, doing, done. And this is our scoreboard for a meeting where we take topic 1 and say we're doing it right now. We're talking about topic 1. And then we move it over to done. So this is our scoreboard. And everybody is in the game now of how quickly we can move these cards over to the end. And like a good game like basketball, we have a shot clock. And everybody sees these two and side chatter stops. You can even use this in a frame like in a Zoom meeting or have a separate camera be on one of these. And it gets everybody focused because we all want to win that game. I'm using it right now to time the presentation. And then last is opt-in. I experimented with making meetings optional, and oh my God, when you have people who actually want to be there, it's incredible what a difference it makes. So that's the framework of games. Go ahead and add in the chat, yes, if you believe one of these can make a difference for your meetings. Awesome. Fantastic. Great. So that's the second framework. As I showed you before, having a Kanban board with stickies, a timer, 5 minutes for settling, especially with Zoom where people are coming on. And if you have several meetings a day, 50 on, 10 off gives people time to get to the next meeting. So that's another hack and principle that I've seen people work really well, especially if you've got back-to-back meetings. The second, as I said I was going to talk about, is the 4 factors of happiness. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to give you the entire Harvard education on positive psychology summarized in 4 steps. And this really guided creating the culture at Zappos too, which is 1, we're happy if we feel like we have progress, perceived progress, because let's say you're progressing but don't feel it. You got to really look back and reflect. How far have we come in our careers, in the year, in the month, and see our progress? Second is perceived control. Do I have control over that progress? Or is it random who gets a raise? Is it random who gets to work on what project? What do I have to do to get where I want to be? Then I have control, or at least perceived, because God knows if we have any control. Third is relationships. If we feel like we have a best friend at work, then we feel really, really engaged. And the last is purpose. Bigger than yourself. Doing something that's bigger than you. These are the 4 factors. If people feel like they're progressing, if people feel like they're in control of that, if they've got time to connect with people and have relationships at work, and if they feel like they're working with something bigger that they need to collaborate across departments to do, you get these right and you'll get the happiness. Okay, now we're going to go to our last framework and then into the hacks and get your questions ready because we're going to go into a Q&A period and then we're going to end earlier before the hour so that you do have time to get to your next meeting. So last framework here, I called 4-12-50-200. What does that mean? It's a kind of a fancy way of saying rituals are important. As you may have noticed, we're kind of losing our minds with this whole, where are we at, what's happening? And the answer to that is to have rituals that we can rely on. And rituals is a fancy word to say something like, we have a weekend. That's a ritual. We know it's coming. So the 4 is, what are you doing quarterly? Quarterly planning, quarterly review, look back, see how far you come in progress. The 12 is, what are you doing every month? The 50 is about how many weeks we have minus 2 weeks vacation. What are you doing every week to plan on a team level, on a company level? And 200 is those daily stand-ups, like I did with my team, where we said, what are you working on? Any blocks, any help you need? And then at the end, we would literally say, ready, break, and clap, and go do our thing. And we would just meet for 10 minutes in the morning and align as a team. So what are the rituals that you're doing? And for any of these, if you're like, I don't know, I really don't know, here's the answer. Ask your people. Tell them you heard this crazy guy with a puppet present and said that the best cultures in the world are doing rhythms and rituals. What should be ours? And this is absolutely key. Like I said, content doesn't change people, experiences do. So don't believe a word I say. Simply experiment and co-create it with your teams, and then you'll learn for yourself. And then you take the credit, not me, because you innovated this with your team. You tried it and experimented. Okay? Great. So we're going to shift over now into the final part, which is the techniques. These are the hacks. Okay. Write in the chat, ready, if you are ready for the hacks. Just want to make sure you're still ready. Manish, Kim, Larry, Sue. Excellent. Excellent. Let's do this. So I like to transition and say, we're not the first people to be dealing with leadership in a virtual environment. This actually went back pretty far. They were dealing with a COVID crisis way back in that turn of the century. So hope these jokes are coming through. It's hard when you don't have a direct audio feedback and everybody's on mute. So,
hey, Robbie, there were a couple questions.
Yeah,
too.
go for it.
I don't know if you want to pause. So I see Bill Miller asked, do relationships suffer in the environment we are operating in? And then Savitha asked, how do we keep teams motivated?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. This is what to keep in mind through the entire thing, is that we all have mixed feelings about this. We all love this and hate this at the same time. Everybody. You get to be in your pajamas, but you're going nuts here, right? You get to see your kids more. You love it, and your kids are driving you nuts, right? So for all these, the answer is both. And what I keep going back to, because your culture is unique, is turning it back to your people and saying, hey, how can we connect more? And you try something, and you know what? Sometimes it bombs and sometimes it fails. And you can use something like I started with, which is that question, what are you obsessed with? That's a fun one. What is a riddle you're trying to solve? That's another fun one. So it's going to take experimenting and saying to people, and even could be potential things like having people meet one-on-one for 10 minutes just to connect. The point is, I don't have the exact answer because all cultures are very different. But the point is to co-create it. You as a leader say to your people, look, I am concerned we are not connecting enough. What do you all think? How can we connect better? And you hear their all ideas and you speak last as the leader. Great. So great question. What was the second question, Amy?
Hey, Robbie, one of the questions too is show us the 4 factors of happiness again.
Sure. So these are the 4 factors of happiness. It's 1, perceived progress. So think about this. I'm just going to talk about that for a moment. Imagine you're in line at a restaurant and you're front and you're like, oh my gosh, my table's next. And it takes a half hour for the table to clear. You'd be so upset, right? But imagine you see a huge line at Disneyland and you're like, oh my God, this is going to take forever. But every minute you're walking a step, every 30 seconds, you're like, oh my God, this line is moving so fast. They're both 30 minutes, but one, we feel like we're progressing. The second is perceived control. It's one thing to say, oh yeah, you might get a raise someday or you might get a new position. It's another thing to say, here's what you need to do to be considered. Read this book, mentor with Pat, talk to Amy about doing biz dev and shadow with Jane, right? Like these are the steps for you to be considered. So give me a little perceived control over my progress. The third is relationships. Is there time and space to create relationships and connect with people? And the fourth is connecting to a higher purpose of the company, of the mission, of the vision, of the team, of even a higher thing of why am I doing this personally? Connect with that deeper purpose. And when you have these 4, again, this came out of Harvard School and Positive Psychology. These are the 4 factors of happiness.
The second question was, do relationships suffer in the environment we are operating in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things, and this is the reason why I started off with saying that there's a difference to using better audio. There's a difference to having an HD webcam. There's a difference to having a light on you because it starts to feel more human. And what we can do, can we humanize this? Is there space, for example, to be real and share what we're suffering with? Is there a chance to say what we hope for, or is it all just back to business? So yes, relationships are suffering, and I've seen the opposite, because remember, it's both. We all have mixed feelings about this. I've seen people reconnect who haven't been connected in a really long time. I just had a Zoom call with my 4 best friends from college I haven't talked to in about 15 years, and it was amazing. So there's opportunities to connect even deeper, and it's also way more challenging. Great questions. Great questions. Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and get into these techniques and then have some more questions, and we'll get into some Q&A. So first, I'm going to talk about leading visually. What does that mean? Well, remember, now that we're virtual, if you're not communicating well, you don't exist. You don't exist as a company. You don't exist as a leader. So how are you visually communicating? Techniques like this. This solves that question of who exactly is working on what. This is a tool like Monday.com, and there are others that show, okay, this person's working on this. This is the status of the project, et cetera. And then we see things are going on. And that also eliminates that fear that employees have of, oh my God, I need to be online 24/7 so people think I'm working, whereas if we have these great dashboards, we can see what people are doing when. Another can relate directly to the product map or whatever we're developing or rolling out. This is something called featuremap.co. It's a really cool way of a Kanban style board to have different projects going at the same time with different people assigned to them. Visually, I can see everything going on in the company and I feel connected to what's happening. That's with a feature map. This one is for a customer journey. And at the bottom there, you can see what departments are working on what. So these are just a few ideas. Again, it helps to crowdsource this. It helps to say to your people, how should we visualize this? Who's an artist? Who wants to work on this? There are passionate people. There's somebody on your team who's been dying to work on this project, and you don't even have to. Another way to visualize this, how do we make this more human? This is something that I did even with a small team, is rather than having a traditional org chart, having this, where it's actual photos of people, and they're connected, who they're working with, what they're working on, what the different departments are. And even though we were a small group and working in person, once I developed this, people felt more connected. So how can we be clearer on that? And I see a question coming in here about how can we have a clear work-life balance? That's a great question. I'd like to reframe it for you, because balance messes with our mind, because it says balance says 50%. 50%. Otherwise, we're out of balance. And it's always been out of balance. Do you spend as much time that you do with your kids as you do on your work? No, it's always going to be out of balance. Here's the key distinction I would use instead. Work-life separation. Is there a way where you can say, mom's on this project, leave mom alone for these 30 minutes even to focus. And that when mom or dad is with the kids, like the cell phone is thrown to the other side of the room. How can you separate so that you can be totally, totally focused on quality time with anything you're doing? See if you can remove and hack your mind by removing the word balance and talk about work-life separation so that you deeply enjoy even a minute. I'd way rather enjoy a minute than have an hour where I feel like I'm scattered with my kids and thinking about work. Great question. Thank you for that. All right, let's keep going. So another way to visualize is, this is something that my client Pearson came up with as I was working with them, of some tips on some meetings. And I'll give you a little spoiler alert right now. I told you there's a reason to stay till the end and be a part of this, because what I did was that meeting, that graphic is part of something larger on here, which is the summary of everything I'm talking about. It's got the visuals, it's got the points all summarized, etc. So you're going to get this PDF. If you haven't been taking notes, don't worry, they're all here. If you have, you got this as well. So you're going to be able to see a lot of these in more detail and go over them again. Great. So next, build accountability. Build accountability. We've got a few more minutes and then we're going to go to questions. So get those questions going. Building accountability is all about the opt-in and the invitation. What does that mean? It means that if you say to me, can you get this thing done? And I say, that should work. That isn't a commitment. True test of opt-in is if I give you the option to opt in, knowing that I trust you. And if you're going to push back on me and say you have other projects to do, we'll have a discussion about it, and that it's safe enough to say no. And that way I can say, would you get this to me in 2 weeks? And you say, and I notice your hesitation. I say, what's your hesitation? Well, John needs to get me the graphics before I can do this. Okay, well, if John gets it to you by this date, can you have it to me in 2 weeks? Yes. And that is an actual opt-in. Without an invitation and an opt-in of somebody saying, yes, you do not have agreement. You have perceived agreement, but not actual agreement. If you create space by issuing invitations, like for meetings, giving the person the safety to push back and negotiate even, and then listen for that commitment of when they're going to have something done by, and a verbal or email commitment, that's when you get accountability. Because otherwise we hack our own minds when we say, yeah, that should work. I should be able to get that to you in 2 weeks. That wasn't a commitment. So that's how you hack accountability. And the last I'm going to talk to you about is making time respond to you. Making time respond to you. Because this was my big aha. Again, I'm going to call you back. If you've been on Facebook, if you've been doing some other things, this is one of the biggest game changers. If you want my 10 years of culture research and education working with the best companies in the world, this is it. What I found is that there's one thing that unifies culture, because you have different salary levels, skill levels, races, genders, projects, all this. The one currency we all equally share is time. And I used to do these week-long and 360 evaluations and figuring out, have this huge report. And now I just ask a culture one question to see if they're really Navy SEALs game changer level culture. And I ask this question: do all your meetings start on time and end on time? Ideally, also, do you deliver on deadline? But just that basic two, do you start meetings on time and end on time? Why? Because when you respect the time of everyone, that means you respect the full culture, and nobody's time is more valuable than anybody else. And where I learned this the most is from Tony Hsieh, CEO of Zappos, who in the 10 years I've known him has never once shown up late to a single meeting. And I've embarrassed myself by showing up late. He's always either early or on time. And it doesn't matter if his previous meetings with Jeff Bezos at Amazon. If he's got another meeting, he leaves. It's your problem if you didn't finish the meeting. He leaves to stay in integrity. And so if you are a leader and you're showing up late to meetings, go ahead and type in the chat. What does that convey? What does that convey to your team and your people when you show up late? Disrespect, I see. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm more important than you are. They're not the priority. They're not that important, not respectful. All true. Here's the game changer one to keep in mind. It conveys that you're out of control. It conveys that you are out of control because this person controlled you. This meeting, this boss, this customer, this anything is in control of you and you're not in control of yourself. And as pack animals, we go, whoa, we are not safe with this leader because something is controlling this leader. Whereas when you make it a priority to be on time and ideally early so you're not stressing to get there. And again, don't believe a word I say. Simply experiment for 2 weeks or even a week of being early to everything and watch as time starts to warp around you. It will blow your mind. That's one of my biggest hacks. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open it up like some live questions, also to chat questions. We're going to make sure that you get the summary of this. And we will end with some time to make sure you can get to your next meeting. And I'm going to stay on the line, though, for anybody who does want to stay. So it's not something where you have to. We'll say our goodbyes. And those who want to hang out for a little bit of an after party, happy to keep on talking. Cool? All right. So let's go ahead and check the chat lines. And if you want to unmute your line and ask a question, go for it. And anything's on the table. Anything related to communications, culture, virtual, all these things.
Robert, this is Jane. In your experience where you work with customers who maybe don't have a strong culture, did you say it takes up to 2 years to really define what that culture is and make it work?
No, I was specifically saying that with a practice like OKRs. Something like OKRs, Sprint, Scrum, these are operating systems for getting things done. And that's new habits that takes a while to work in. Culture can change as quickly as you make it clear that somebody who violates it is gone. I call that a public execution. If you are very, very clear on your policies and you start hiring by it, but especially firing by it, if they notice that Sue, who's our top salesperson, is suddenly gone because she violated one of those values of the culture, and now we go, oh my, what? How could they can Sue? Like she was killing it. Oh, because the culture is more important than any one individual. So if you get clear on your values, and in my book, The Culture Blueprint, I've got a whole map to developing them if you don't know how to develop them. But once you do, it's committing to living them, hiring by them, and firing by them. And as quickly as you can do that, the quicker the culture can change.
Got quite a few questions here coming in the chat, Robbie.
Mm-hmm. Great. Can you go ahead and read them?
Yeah. What is your elevator speech for cultures against teleworking, even in a pandemic?
Cultures against teleworking?
Against, yes.
I don't have a speech for that. I mean, the thing is, these things are going to be very unique. Some cultures are going to be able to meet in person, some aren't. But what's, I think, important to know is how we're adjusting to this. One company I work with called MoveU, they had the most amazing office space, and they realized, oh, we can get things done being in our homes, and we're oddly working half the time and getting better results. And a lot of people are realizing this. So I think what's helpful is to at least give you, if it is an option, give yourself the option to make this work, because God knows how long this is going to go, and you might get better results.
Okay. Pete Kleffner says, how does a team's habits impact culture?
It's everything. I mean, think about it this way. This is a little trick. Is you say to somebody in a conversation, I can predict your next week. And they'll say, no, you can't. You can't predict the future. I'm like, yeah, I can. All I need you to do is ask you one thing. What'd you do last week? And it's 80% of that you're probably going to do again, right? Because that's what our habits are, is the things that we're doing. So it's everything. I mean, it's 80%. Aside from when, and some companies thrive on this, when something goes on fire and suddenly we all get focused. What if you could get focused without everything being on fire? Which actually brings me to another thing I want to mention, which is a concept that I'm working on. You can email me at Robert@Culture Blueprint if you want more on this, but I'll tell you the hack and the concept right now, which is called the 48-hour day. What I found for myself and others is that with all this time and freedom, it gets overwhelming, and I'm oddly way less productive having way more time. But what you do is you set a goal that you think would take a few weeks for 48-hour period, and you spend that 48-hour period doing it, and you track the time. I've got a template to track that time. It blew my mind because not only did I get it done, but I slept through the nights and I got all my other emails done because I was focused on that one thing. So this is a concept to experiment with a team or with yourself. Commit to a goal for 48 hours. And it's amazing, like I said, when you start to pay attention to time this way, time starts to organize around you. And that focus, I got way more done than when I said I'm just going to be productive and not have a focus.
Okay.
Great.
Leslie Kellogg's asking, how varied have you found culture across regions? Or I guess, does region have an impact on culture?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are very different conceptions of what's okay, what's not okay. Of, something like I've heard with the Japanese is they don't feel very comfortable disagreeing in public. And that's something that you need to take into account. The one thing that I would say to pay attention to is, okay, what's going to be across cultures? Values can be very important to that. There can be subcultures with values that still support those other values, but the main values have to be strong. And I believe the relationship to time. Notice, I don't want to call out specific countries, but you'll notice specific countries are very industrious with time, and they are very, very successful economically. And others are loose on time, and they tend to not be strong economically. I was talking to a friend who said he was part of two mastermind groups of people. One was millionaires. The other were more like hippies. And he said, which one do you think everybody showed up on time, and which one was everybody late or canceled the meeting? It was always the millionaires who showed up right on time. So that's the one thing that I'd say, look, if you're going to make it work across the company, be careful with a culture that doesn't value time so much, because that can be really hard to get things done in that environment.
Okay. And Julian Delvat says, what's the smallest thing we can start with?
Oh, great. So there are a few. One is be early to everything. Absolutely be early to everything. Another principle is co-create. When you find yourself being confused, what do I do? Talk to your team. Talk to your people. Say, I want us to do this. I'm not sure how to do it. Let's talk about it. So co-create. If you ever find yourself struggling and alone, even if you don't have a full team, talk with somebody else. What they found with computer people with pair programming is they could solve problems with somebody just sitting next to them, watching their work and not even saying anything. That's the power of co-creation. Culture doesn't exist until there's more than one person. So if you find yourself struggling with anything, like take this and talk about it with somebody else. And just have a conversation, because simply getting out of your mind and your head, it's going to put the wheels working. And then experiment. Don't believe me. Simply experiment. Cool.
Thanks. And Bruce Weinberg says, do you see a difference when working with millennials versus an older audience? What about in a mix of the two?
I see the problem I see with the whole millennial divide is that it's, again, this framework of we need to make people happy and cater to them. Whereas at a place like Zappos, where everybody's from teenagers, literally like 18-year-olds, to people in their 60s, late 60s, all coming together, different ages. Why? Because the game is so strong. It's the same. If you've got a really strong game, it's the equivalent of saying, should we change soccer to adapt for this new age group? No, you either like playing soccer or you don't. And so that's what's really important with a company is to get clear on your vision, get clear on rules in the forms of the principles and values that you have, and enforce them. And that way, if you truly believe in those, the people who resonate with them, age level or not, are going to come to you. And those who don't are going to feel detracted from it. So that's when you get strong on your own culture versus trying to adapt to the individual people. That is going towards the route of spoiling kids, in my opinion.
Okay. Manish Das is asking, during these virtual times, there doesn't seem to be a clear break from work. How do you enforce without disrespecting?
Yeah, I mean, this is where there's a book called Essentialism where the boss encouraged the man to show up at a meeting even though his wife was giving birth and said the customer will really value it. The customer thought they were crazy. The question here is, would you rather be respected or liked? Would you rather be respected or liked? Because if you respect your boundaries and you're getting stuff done, then people respect. They may not like that they can't reach you at 9 p.m. on Thursday, but they respect you for owning your own boundaries and getting things done in a timely manner. So yes, it's uncomfortable. I think things are getting more and more awkward. But if you can make that separation, not only are you going to feel better and respect yourself more and respect your boundaries, it's going to make you be more productive in the time that you do have because your mind knows it's going to cut off at 6 p.m. and you won't be able to do work after that. So you're going to get more efficient. Again, time, you start to own time rather than time owning you.
And Karen Kariki is asking, how do you deal with some team members that like to work from home all the time while others don't like to be in a remote environment all the time?
Yeah, so what helps with this is to do experiments. You know, Microsoft did an experiment, I think it was in Japan, where they did a 4-day work week. And they found that people were more productive. And they said, okay, we're going to do this for a limited time and see what happens. There's also another company called Paddleboards that experimented with a 5-hour workday and said, look, we're going to run an experiment, see if we can be more productive. They were. But they also found that doing that all the time was actually less productive if they did it the whole year. So they focused on doing that like for the summer months, but other times when they were more business intensive, they came in for longer days. The point of this is that you can only figure out through experimentation. And the word experiment is key because you get away from beliefs. I believe we should all be working from home. I believe we should all be working in person. I believe it should be half and half. Okay, what scientists do is they suspend their beliefs and say, we're going to have a hypothesis and run an experiment, a bound in time experiment, and then we're going to see the results, and then we're going to reflect on the data rather than opinion. So this is why I keep stressing experiments, because it doesn't force belief change. You run it with a tighter scope of time and people, and then you look at the data to make your decision rather than your opinion of something that you haven't fully done yet. So I, again, would encourage you to keep experimenting. Great. Well, I want to just make this point.
Kevin Harrell's asking, what's the easiest? Okay, yeah.
I'm just going to say just in a moment first that we are 5 till the hour. If you have to go to another meeting or if you want more time so that you can be on time or be early, I totally understand. There's no offense here. We're going to make sure that you get the summary of this. So if you want to wave bye in the chat, you can go ahead and do so. I hope that you have found this valuable. I'm going to stay here for as long as people want. But I think also if you might leave in the chat, what is one big takeaway? What is one big takeaway that you have? And if somebody wants to say one live in person through the mic, that would be great as well. What is a big aha or something that you can take and use right now? Bring puppets to board meetings. Yes. Yeah. Julian, you're my kind of people. Thank you for that. You've got work to do. Being on time to meetings, fantastic. Opting in. Go ahead and unmic your mic if you want to share one in person. Big takeaway, only 3 priorities. Absolutely. Be on time. The restaurant, Disney Q, perceive progress. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, as those come in, Chase, did you want to say that last question?
Yeah, let me joke. It was about best practices around breaking a habit. Like, what's the best way to break a habit?
Yeah. So the thing is, this is a concept called reduce the friction. Is how do you set it up to make it easy for yourself? For example, I've seen people literally sleep in their gym clothes so that they can jump up and just run. How do you clear out distractions? How do you separate? How do you, like, for example, I have a work area and I have my Netflix area, and then way I separate my bus. I dress up sometimes like this because I want to get into this habit, this mode of I'm in work mode, because when I work in sweats, you think I get as much done? No. So these are some techniques. There's a book called The Power of Habit that's really good that talks more about how to create triggers and how to disarm negative habits and things like that. Thank you. Great tips. All on time. This has been great. I'm so happy that you guys have gotten a lot of value out of this.
Hey, Robbie, it's Pat here. I just, before we lose everybody, I just wanted to thank you so much. And what I'm seeing in the chat is there's so many practical tips, whether we apply one today or we have several. I've got notes in addition to what we'll send. And believe me, on behalf of the SAP HANA Executive Advisory Council, I want to thank Intel and Rachel. Thank you for being our guest as well. And then Robbie, we really just want to thank you. I mean, the energy and, and all the practical tips and all the comments in the chat are greatly appreciated. And I just want to let the council members know that Jane, Chase, and I will kind of wrap this up in a summary report, get this out to you, and we'll resend Rachel's invite for June 2nd. So thank you again, Robbie, on behalf of us. And I'll just turn it back to you, Robbie.
Great. So my intention is, I said the pre-party concept, for those of you who were here earlier, got to listen to my book. I call it the after-party concept here, which is respecting that some people are moving on to their next partying meeting. And hey, I am here to hang out like I would at the end of a different speech. And be like in the crowd too, talking to you. So if you want to ask more questions by chat, I am here for you. If you want to say it live, you can. If you're going to your next party or your next meeting like Leslie there, go for it. I'm here at your service. And if you want to follow up with me too, I'm Robert at cultureblueprint.com. Cool. It's so cool to read these takeaways. As questions are coming in, anybody on the Intel side want to speak into the mic about their takeaway?
Chase, do we want to go back to the questions?
Yeah, I can keep going with questions.
Okay,
Robbie.
great. Go for the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, or if we want people who are still on the line to speak up. But yeah, one was, we kind of talked about this one a little bit. This is Samvita Satyan about from a global company. We're talking about diversity of regional cultures. How do you draw them into a common culture, or maybe do you draw them into a common culture if they're from different regions?
Yeah, so this is the notion of culture and subculture. Top culture is the values that are present regardless, and if that's only three, that's only three. And the subcultures can do what they want as long as they don't violate, as long as they are in support of the full company values. So it's important to make that distinction. The subculture is in alignment with those core values that everybody can be fired for, right? And this varies per company. At Zappos, it's very service-oriented. Like, so for example, at Macintosh during those days, people would yell at each other. If you did that at Zappos, you'd be fired the next day. That's not the kind of decorum that we'd have there, right? So it's different per cultures, but the rules need to be the same. What is the picking up the ball with your hands in soccer analogy where you get a penalty? What is that for your culture? What are those offenses? And you've truly dialed in when you can walk up to a manager and say, what is a fireable offense here? And they can answer something besides harassment or negligence.
Okay. We had Andre Repko said, can we operate successfully serving a customer that doesn't share our culture or doesn't share our opinions?
So this is a great question. The point is, there are people you disagree with, and then there's get them out of my life, right? And that's a distinction where the phrase, to politely say it, is we invite you to shop elsewhere. We are allowed to select our clients. But there's also an opportunity to give them the chance to improve and say, look, this is our culture. If you want to do business with us, these are the rules we play. If not, no hard feelings. A different vendor is for you. And that can be really powerful. And again, this is, would you rather be respected or liked? And my belief is that if you prioritize respect, you have a good chance of getting liked too. But if you're only getting liked and disrespecting yourself and your culture and your values, what's the value of that being liked? It's usually just to avoid uncomfortable situations.
Robbie, just to speak to that for a moment on the Intel SAP partnership, one of Intel's values is constructive confrontation. And we were having a meeting amongst the two companies, and what I found helped was just to say that up front to my counterparts and say, look, this is a key value of Intel's, so just kind of understand where we're coming from. And the light bulb went on, and it led to a path of really great discussion.
That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Great to hear it. Are there other questions?
Do we want to do another question?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, remote working. As companies consider drastic travel cuts post-COVID, going into all remote workers, never physically meeting team members, is this sustainable?
We're very adaptable creatures. It's That's going to be the question. And this is different per industry. Some, you know, if you've got a restaurant right now, God help you, right? If you're doing online learning, if you're Zoom, you're killing it. It really depends per industry. And this is, I want to make a meta point about this, which is that there's very abstract, which is where a lot of leaders think, and then there's very specific, which frontline people think. And the real movers and shakers in the organizations are at the manager, director, VP level in here, because they need to think in both abstract and detail. And the danger of being an executive and a leader is you get too abstract. And when we get too abstract, then we don't really solve problems. It's like when somebody says to me, culture change is really hard. Okay, you've given me nothing I can work with. Right? But if I say, well, why is culture change hard? Well, because it's communication between departments is hard. Well, like what? Well, marketing and tech. Okay, well, what do you mean? Well, marketing makes a promise and tech doesn't fulfill it, and then they get mad at each other. Okay, great. Now I'm starting to roll up my sleeves, and we're going to talk about this challenge because we've gotten into a level of specificity where we can solve the problem. So think about this when you ask your questions, when you make your point. Is it at a level enough where I can solve it? Because right now, that question is too abstract for me to give you an answer that's going to be really helpful, right? So how do we drop that to a level of abstraction to more detail where if there was a specific answer, it would solve your specific problem?
Okay. Let's see, Andre Vrepko says, can we be successful in building a culture when we have limited control of who is in our team? What if someone is not engaging despite all the efforts and ideas?
Well, one, there's, first of all, pulling that person to the side. One of the principles of leadership, it's from Good to Great, is to criticize privately, praise publicly. So first we pull that person aside and say, hey, first, is everything going on? Everything okay? You know, maybe they just had, God forbid, death of family or something. Like, we want to make sure that they're just okay first as human beings. Second, we say, okay, we notice you're not really engaging in this and that, et cetera. Let's talk about why. Is it, do you feel shy? Do you feel awkward? Do you feel like nobody respects you? Like, what is the real reason? Let's in a private, safe conversation start talking about this. And again, that's going to be different for each person. And, you know, it's something where we sometimes adapt to introverts, for example. Like, I'll do that where I'll say, put some questions on the wall with sticky notes so that the introverts who don't want to raise their hand, they can do it, or they can do it in the chat here, and we can make that work. Other times, maybe it doesn't work for your culture. Is it absolutely key, or is it something that we can adjust for introverts and people who don't want to? And also, this is another distinction too. If you have somebody who's quote unquote negative, the question is, are they truly negative, or are they amazing at finding problems? Because that's not a bad skill to have the devil's advocate, to have that somebody who's punching holes in the idea because they want to make it stronger. And it feels negative. But the question is, are they doing it from a place of wanting things to be better, or are they just negative? So this is only found out really through conversations.
Thank you, Robert. And this is Andre. I stayed a little bit longer because I wanted to hear your response to a couple of questions. Appreciate it. It was a great presentation. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Have a great week.
Okay.
All right. I think if I'm
that
looking through,
wraps up the questions in the chat, Robbie. Lots of good feedback.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Everybody left with a comment. That's great stuff, and a positive one at that. So great stuff. It was great reading all the comments and seeing all the chat, and you know, again, the practical advice that we can apply today. So
excellent. Well, it's been quite a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So Jane, are we going to wrap this up? Amy and Rachel and Chase?
yes, just to summarize, I'll be posting the recording out to our JAM site, as well as the document that Robert will be sending me. And Robert, I will be sending you the chat so you can choose your winners like you promised at the beginning. So I'm going to hold you to it.
Great.
And
Excellent.
That's wonderful. And obviously, Robert, I think you said if people want to connect with you offline, they can do that as well.
Excellent. Excellent. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks again, Robbie. On behalf of all of us here, thank you. And SAP HANA Executive Advisory Councils, have a beautiful day.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Everyone.
Take care.